everybody, and welcome back to Writer's Blockbuster. Today we're going to be talking about the 1985 cult classic H.P. Lovecraft-inspired Reanimator. If you guys like zombie movies with really fun little twists to them, with really great practical effects, and like over-the-top characters, this is definitely a movie that you guys would enjoy. So, warning for everybody, there will be spoilers with this movie. You can see the movie for absolutely free on Tubi. I will be sure to put a link in the description below, so go ahead and check that out. It is very much worth the watch. Without further ado, let's get into it. We open in Switzerland, where we hear screams coming from Dr. Gruber's office. A fellow doctor and the receptionist burst into Gruber's office, and they see Dr. Herbert West. He's our boy, Jeffrey Combs. I love this guy. He is standing over Dr. Gruber with a syringe filled with some green liquid. The security guards grab West off of Gruber, and then Gruber just shoots up. He's got blood spewing out of his head. He's grabbing at his head in incredible pain, and slowly his head just starts to fill with blood. It starts to slowly expand until finally it just pops and Dr. Gruber is dead. The other doctor confronts West for a moment. He just says, "You've killed him." And West says, "No, I didn't kill him. I gave him life." We then cut to our med student, Dan Cain, and he is currently performing CPR on a crashing patient. He's trying his best, and the nurse just says, "Doctor, we've got to call it." And Dan is the kind of guy, he does not want to. He's persistent. He keeps trying long before the nurse would have given up. Unfortunately, it is to no avail. The next scene we see, Dr. Cain is just wheeling his patient down into the morgue. It's here that we meet Dr. Carl Hill. And Hill is a teacher for Dan. He's also a brain surgeon that works for the hospital. He's currently performing an autopsy on a patient while we're talking to him. Dan and him talk for a moment, and then the dean actually walks in. The dean is there to introduce Dr. Hill to the newest student, who is, dun dun dun, Herbert West! The madman himself. He is now becoming a student with this university, and he knows Dr. Hill. He knows of his work, and he looks at Hill, and he is just ruthless. He calls him a plagiarist. He says his work is just a bunch of BS, basically saying all of his theories that surround brain death are flat out wrong, and the things that he got right are actually plagiarized from Dr. Gruber himself. So West has a personal vendetta against Hill, and now Hill just does not like West. We then cut and see that Dan is posting a flyer saying he's searching for a new roommate, and then we meet his girlfriend, Megan Halsey. And Halsey is also the dean's daughter, so there's a little bit of a complication there, maybe some conflict of interest. Dan and Megan head back to his apartment. They do a little bit of that hankin', a little bit of that pankin', and then when they're all finished, they go to the front door. They open it up, and boom, guess who's waiting for them? It's Herbert West. He is looking to become Dan's new roommate. West is incredibly weird throughout the entire thing. He is asking Dan some pretty strange questions. He's ensuring that the place that they stay has a basement, that sort of thing. And then he is very just insistent. He's like, "I'm now your roommate." He shoves a wad of cash in Dan's face. And Dan's basically just like, "I need the money. All right, you're my roommate." We cut to the next morning, where we see that Dan and Herbert are both in Dr. Hill's class, and Dr. Hill is showing the class how to perform a brain autopsy, and as he's performing this, he is telling them his theory. He's telling them that brain death usually happens within 6 to 12 minutes, and Herbert snaps a pencil at him. He just keeps snapping pencils every time that the doctor brings up his theory. Herbert snaps that pencil. It's just his way of shutting the doctor up, and it works. It's so great. It works. Dr. Hill gets so frustrated with Herbert that he shuts the class down. He says, "Hey, we're done for the day, goodbye." And at the end of class, West goes up to Hill and he's just like, "How dare you teach these students this drivel, this BS, this absolute nonsense, how dare you, how dare you." It's so great. We then cut to that night, where we see Dr. Hill is having dinner with Dean Halsey and Megan, and it becomes very clear to us that Dr. Hill has a crush or some kind of an infatuation on Megan. It's very creepy. There's a huge age difference. It's quite gross. Quite frankly, it's pretty gross. And Dan he comes in and he takes Megan on a date. So that scene kind of ends with that. It's just planting these seeds that Dr. Hill is kind of a creepo. When Megan goes over to Dan's house, she notes that Rufus, Dan's cat, is missing. And she says, ever since West moved in, Rufus has been acting weird. And so they go and they start looking for Rufus. They go and try to find him. They end up going into West's room, and Megan opens the fridge, and there is Rufus. He is dead in the fridge. They also find this vial of green liquid in there, and West confronts them. And he's like, how dare you? Why are you in my room? How dare you be in here? This is an invasion of my privacy. And of course, Dan is just heartbroken. He doesn't have anything to say to West. He's just like, my cat is, my cat's dead. What happened? And Herbert ends up telling Dan that Rufus actually suffocated when Rufus was digging through the garbage and a jar fell on his head. It was a freak accident. And then West put him into his fridge because he didn't want Dan to find him like that. He was gonna tell him sometime, but yeah, that's what he says. Dan kind of believes him. Megan definitely doesn't believe him. But yeah, that's his line, and that's what he's sticking to. In the night, Dan is startled awake by a blood-curdling shriek. He runs with a bat to West's room, but West doesn't answer, the door is locked. So he goes and he investigates himself into the basement. And in the basement, he finds West is actually running around and Rufus is attached to his back. He's clawing at him, he's attacking him, and Herbert is kind of just running around, pretty much helpless. He's able to finally throw Rufus off, and they kind of search around for him before Rufus ends up attacking Dan as well. And Dan has no choice but to defend himself. He ends up using the bat, and they end up killing Rufus. When this is over though, Herbert does not give Dan the reaction that we're expecting. Herbert is like jazzed, he's excited, he's like, did you see what just happened? Dan, do you see? This was my work, this is what I've done. Do you understand how important this is now? Do you now see the beauty in my creation? And Dan's just like, what are you talking about? Like, Rufus was clearly not dead, like you must have been lying to me. And he says, no, he was definitely dead. And they look at the body now, and Dan says, well, now Rufus is dead, that's for sure. So Herbert goes, gets his serum, and gives it to Rufus again. And now this cat that's basically just this bloody pulp is alive, it's screaming, it's angry. And Dan, of course, he is just in shock. Herbert is so excited, he's so happy, but Dan is in shock. And while this is all going on, Megan comes down into the basement and also sees the state that Rufus is in. And of course, she freaks out. The next day, Dan goes and actually tells the dean exactly what happens. He tells him, we killed the cat came back alive. West's theories, West's serum is legit, it works, it actually brings the dead back to life. Even Megan saw it, and that was a mistake. The second that he brought Megan into it, the dean shuts him down. He gets irrationally angry. He says, how dare you involve my daughter in this kind of a thing? You're out of here, dude. I am taking away your student loan, taking away the ability for you to pay for this school anymore, so you are just screwed. Get out of here. And Dan's like, hold on, you are being irrational. You need to take a breath. You're ruining my life. And the dean's like, I don't care. Get out of here. Tell West he is also gone. No longer a student here at all. In the next scene, Dan is escorting what we assume must be his final corpse into the morgue. He gets into the morgue, and that's when actually it's revealed to be Dr. Herbert West. He's just sitting there, he's got no shoes or socks on, so of course he's got to put his shoes and his socks on. And you guys, this is when you understand that Herbert might be a psychopath. Look at how he puts his shoes and socks on. He goes sock, shoe, sock, shoe. He doesn't go sock, sock, shoe, shoe. There's something wrong with this guy. He is definitely cuckoo crazy. That being said, he's also pretty dang smart. So he has this idea. He's like, if we can bring a corpse back to life, we can show the dean that my theory works. He will not be able to deny us. It will be irrefutable. We will have evidence. This is the most important thing maybe to ever come from medicine, right? It's the ability to bring the dead back to life. It's big. It's the biggest. So they go into the fridge and they start looking at the corpses. They're looking for the freshest corpse because the serum works best if the corpses are fresh. He wants to see if the consciousness is still there, still intact, still fresh. They find a fairly fresh corpse, and the man comes to life, but he is kind of bashful looking. He is very much not responsive to their commands. He just goes and starts attacking them, while at the same time, like, trying to hide his nudity. Like, there's a piece of him that knows that, like, nudity is not socially acceptable, it seems, so he's trying to hide while also being incredibly angry at these people for, like, basically bringing him back from the dead. He doesn't know what's going on. He's confused, and so he's trying to attack Dan and Herbert, and meanwhile the dean has come into the morgue. He's tracked Dan down. He's seen that Dan has gone into the morgue, so he wants to see, what the heck are you doing, dude? The Dean is pounding on the freezer door, and then the corpse hears it. The reanimated guy, he goes to the door and he kicks it down, crushing the Dean underneath. He then rips the fridge door off of the Dean and starts just pummeling him. He bites off his fingers, and in the end, he ends up killing the Dean. Herbert grabs the bone saw.
Look out.
And he's able to impale the corpse, the reanimated corpse, killing him again finally, and basically, like, you know, becoming the hero a little bit. And then he's got this epiphany, this opportunity, this freshest possible corpse that there ever could be, and also a way to save them from, like, going to jail basically for secondhand murdering some dude. They grab the Dean's body and they put it on the table, and then they use the serum on the Dean. The Dean comes to life and he's not happy. He's not fully there either. He grabs both Dan and Herbert by the throats, but Megan walks in and she sees the Dean doing so, and she's like, "Dad, what are you doing? What are you doing?" And he ends up running and hiding in the corner and cowering. He is very, very childish in his mind now. He's gone back quite a few steps, but he is conscious in some aspect. Herbert thinks really quick on his feet in this scene. It's pretty great. He ends up blaming the Dean for everything that's happened. He says that the Dean has had just this mental snap. He's like, look at him. He's clearly crazy now. He had the mental snap. He grabbed the bone saw. He started attacking us. He ended up stabbing this corpse. The corpse, of course, they didn't think was alive at all. The police didn't think was alive. So he's like, yeah, that's what happened to the corpse. And then he goes to comfort Dan. And Dan is broken. He's, you know, he just killed his girlfriend's dad. He just killed the dean of the school, basically, and then brought him back to life. He is fully in shock. He goes down into the fetal position.
Shock. Don't worry.
The dean is, of course, checked into a mental institution, and Dr. Hill is chosen to be his caregiver. He goes to Megan and he basically says, I want to do some exploratory brain surgery on your father to find out what's going on, because, you know what, we've got no clue. And Megan just signs the paper. She's like, okay, that's fine. And Hill tries then to put some moves onto Megan, and she just is not responsive. He's so creepy. When Megan gets home, Dan is waiting for her, and he ends up just telling her the truth. He's like, your dad is not crazy. He's actually dead. The same thing that happened to Rufus. We brought him back. He ended up dying. That's why he's acting like this. And they both just break down. It's such a just real scene. We then cut back to Dan's basement, and West is still working on his serum, but he's interrupted when Dr. Hill comes down, and he basically just ends up saying, hey, listen, I did experiments on Halsey, on the dean, and guess what? He is actually dead. I've actually discovered that your theories are working because I've seen that you have killed the dean. He ends up just blackmailing him, right? He just says, if you don't give me all of your research, if you don't give me credit for everything that you've created now, then you are going to jail, you're doomed. And, you know, West, he doesn't have any options. He's broken. He ends up just very teary-eyed, handing all of his research over to Dr. Hill. West then shows Dr. Hill an example of his work. He shows him under a microscope the formula working, and while Dr. Hill is distracted looking under the microscope, West slowly backs up and he grabs a shovel, and then he slowly gets closer and closer and closer, and finally he boom, bashes Dr. Hill in the head, and then he doesn't stop. He grabs the blade of the shovel and he starts bashing it down on Dr. Hill's neck. He ends up kicking at it, he ends up chopping, and blood is going everywhere, and he ends up completely decapitating Dr. Carl Hill. And then, of course, since he's a mad freaking scientist, Herbert West then decides it's probably gonna be a pretty sweet experiment that I will never be able to replicate if I can bring Dr. Hill's head and body back to life independently. He gives the reagent to the body, he then gives the reagent to the head, and Dr. Hill to life, and then he starts just talking. It's kind of caveman-y at first, but he slowly starts coming to, starts showing that he's got intelligence, and he distracts Herbert for long enough for Dr. Hill's body to actually sneak behind West and bash his head into the table, completely knocking him out cold. We then cut back to Dan and Megan, and they are going into Dr. Hill's office. They're going to visit Megan's father again and to touch base with Dr. Hill, and they see Dr. Halsey. They see the dean just kind of cowering in the corner. Dan continues to investigate Hill's office, and he opens this drawer and he finds a folder filled with just Megan memorabilia, basically. It's like locks of her hair, photos of her, like headlines in the news of things that she's accomplished or done, like ever since she was a girl. It's just so creepy. And then at the same time, Megan is going to check out her father. She's going to investigate what's going on because he's normally been violent. She knows that he's been very violent. She taps on his shoulder and she's shocked to see that Dr. Hill has actually fully lobotomized the dean. He has taken away his free will completely. He's made him even more of a shell of what he used to be. West wakes up and he finds that all of his research is missing. It's been stolen by Dr. Hill. He finds Dan and Megan and he basically just tells them about it. We then cut and we see that Dr. Hill has gone back to his office. And here's where we see some of that little Lovecraft, all right? We see Dr. Hill lift his head up and he starts speaking with the dean. And he starts having the psychic link with him and he is able to fully control Dean Halsey now. Like he's got this strange psychic ability, probably because his corpse was so fresh, he got so much of that reagent in him. And now he is able to control the dead. Hill tells the dean to do some kind of a task, and then we cut and we see that Dr. Hill is now sneaking into the morgue. He's got this great disguise on, and he is pulling the corpses out of the freezer just one by one. We then cut back to Megan's house, and her father just bursts in, grabs her, takes her away from Dan, kidnaps her completely. West wakes Dan up, and they're like, let's go to the hospital. We know where they're going. We know that they are going to the morgue. We know they're going to the hospital. We've got to go save Megan. Dr. Hill confesses his love for Megan. He just pours his heart out, but he doesn't care that she's not reciprocating, right? He just does not care. He's like, in death you'll follow me, in death you'll love me. I don't care. Eventually, I'm going to have you completely. And then West shows up and he just starts confronting Hill. Of course, he is insulting him. He's calling him a plagiarist. He's saying that he's like, dude, you're dead, and even now you're boring. You're outdated. And Dan is in the background. He's trying to sneak Megan out while West is distracting Hill. And then all of a sudden, all of the corpses that are surrounding them pop up. The zombies in this movie are all super fun. Like, all the corpses are unique. They all have very specific ways that they've died. And the makeup department, you can see it on their effects. You can see the practical effect work that has shown every one of their individual deaths that we've covered throughout this movie now. And so now these zombies are attacking our trio, and they don't know what to do. They're overwhelmed pretty quickly, and Hill has seemingly won. Hill then straps West down to a table and he has his body begin to give West a lobotomy. He's got his laser drill in hand. He's getting ready, and Dr. West, he's screaming. Herbert is just screaming. He doesn't know what to do. So Megan ends up just pleading to her father. She's like, please, there's got to be a piece of you in there. Please, please, please. And there is. The dean snaps out of Hill's control. He runs and he tackles his body, and then he grabs Dr. Hill's head and he just starts to squeeze. Well, all the other corpses are just mentally attached to him, so they start to also feel the pain of the dean squeezing down, and it allows Herbert time to sneak up behind Dr. Hill's body and stab him with some, he says it's a different form of the reagent. It kills the body, but then it ends up bringing the intestines inside of the body to life. The intestines shoot out. They wrap around Dr. West. They wrap around his legs. They completely encase him. They start grabbing around his neck. He is seemingly captured now. He's slowly being dragged into this void. Dan and Megan and the dean try to help, but the dean ends up getting overrun by the other zombies. He is in such a cool shot. Look at this. He is just ripped limb from limb. You just see his shadow just pop all the limbs off, basically. It's super, super cool. They can't get to Herbert. They can't help him. So West, he doesn't know what else to do. He cares more about his research than his own life. He grabs his notes and he tosses them to Dan just before he is dragged away into the void. So Dan grabs the notes, he grabs the serum, he grabs the bag, he runs out of there with Megan, but they are still attacked by the other corpses. One of the corpses is this burned guy. He's got this crazy charred arm, and he grabs Megan by the neck. He grabs her and he starts to squeeze. Dan can't help. He doesn't know what to do. He runs and he grabs a fireman's axe, and he's able to chop the corpse's arm off, releasing Megan, but it's too late. Megan falls down. She is dead. We see Dan grabbing Megan. He lifts her up and he runs her into the, they're in a hospital, so he runs her into an emergency room. They start doing compressions on her. And then we get a mirror shot from the beginning of the movie. Remember, when Dan is doing the compressions, he doesn't want to give up. The nurse then says, "Doctor, it's time to call it. Like, I'm sorry, we loved Meg too, but it's time." But Dan just does not want to give up. He doesn't want to give up. He doesn't know what else to do. Finally, he's broken, he's hopeless, and then he remembers. He looks down. He sees Dr. Herbert West's bag, opens it up, and grabs the reagent out. He then administers it into Megan, and the movie is over. That's where it ends. It cuts to black right there. We hear a scream. That is Reanimator, you guys. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like as well as subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. It helps me feel really good. And yeah, I mean, I love these kind of movies, so I just plan to keep them coming. If there is a movie you would like to see me break down in the future, write it in the comments below, and I will try and get to it. But yeah, until next time, I hope you guys have just a wonderful day. Bye!